The kitchen light was the color of a dying lantern, pale gold, trembling, fighting the dark that pressed itself against every window of the Alderman Ranch house like something that wanted in. Elias Alderman heard it before he saw it. A soft, rhythmic thudding. The kind of sound a man knows in his bones before his mind catches up, fists working dough against a floured board. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen in his wool socks and his nightshirt, one hand braced on the doorframe, hair gone silver as winter grass, watching. The girl was maybe 16. She had her mother's narrow shoulders and her mother's way of moving, economical, quiet, like someone who had learned early that the less space you took up, the safer you were. Her dark hair was loose, falling across her face as she leaned into the bread with her whole weight. Her hands were red to the wrists. There was flour on her cheek, flour on the worn cotton of her nightgown. The clock on the wall read 3:17 in the morning. Elias didn't speak right away. He watched the girl work. There was something urgent in it, not the slow, patient rhythm of someone who had simply woken hungry and decided to bake. This was the kneading of a person trying to outrun something. Arms driving down, folding, pressing. Driving down again. He took one step into the kitchen. The floorboard announced him, as it always had and always would. The girl spun. Her elbow caught the crockery bowl and it would have gone off the table entirely if Elias hadn't moved faster than a man his age had any business moving, one hand shooting out to catch the bowl's rim. They stood there a moment, 3 feet apart, the girl's eyes wide and dark as creek water at midnight, Elias's hand still on the bowl. "You going to tell me," he said, voice low as a held breath, "or am I going to have to ask your mother in the morning?" Her jaw tightened. Her chin came up just slightly, the smallest act of defiance wrapped inside the posture of a frightened child. And something in Elias Alderman's chest shifted the way old timber shifts before it finally gives. If this story already has you feeling something, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. They had come on a Tuesday, which was the kind of day that holds no ceremony. The sky over the Texas Hill Country was white with heat, not blue, the sun trying to kill everything beneath it with the patient, methodical cruelty of something that has all the time in the world. Elias had been sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold when the wagon appeared at the end of his long dirt road. He watched it come the way a man watches weather roll in off the flats, not alarmed, but attentive. He had been told to expect them. Told by his nearest neighbor, Roy Delaney, who owed Elias a favor stretching back 15 years and had collected on it by asking him to take in a woman who needed work. Roy had not said much else. Roy never did. The wagon stopped at his gate. A woman climbed down first, then turned and helped down a boy of perhaps 7 and then a girl who moved with the careful stiffness of someone in pain, though she hid it well. Elias noted the hiding of it and filed it away. The woman's name was Cora Vasquez. She was perhaps 40, though the road had written additional years into the corners of her eyes and along the set of her mouth. She was not broken, that was the first thing Elias understood. She had the posture of someone who had been bent nearly to the ground and had, through sheer stubborn biology, straightened back up. She wore a dark dress that had been mended in 3 places along the hem. She carried a single carpet bag and a cast-iron skillet wrapped in a flour sack. The skillet told Elias everything Roy's sparse words hadn't. "Mr. Alderman," she said, coming through the gate. She did not extend her hand. She met his eyes. "I'm Cora. These are my children. Marisol and Tomas." "Elias," he said. He looked at the children briefly, then back at her. "You hungry?" She held his gaze a beat. "We are." He turned and went back inside, and they followed. The house was in a state that a man living alone for 6 years produces almost without noticing, a slow accumulation of neglect dressed up as practicality. The kitchen table had mail on it that dated back to the previous spring. The window above the sink was fogged with grease. There were boots by the back door and a bridle hanging from a chair post and a stack of mending that had sat so long it had become furniture. The floor was clean enough because Elias swept it out of habit, but the corners were dark with old dust, and the curtains had faded from what had once been a cheerful yellow to the color of old bone. Cora set her carpet bag down by the door. She set the skillet on the stove. She looked at the kitchen for a long moment, not with judgment, but with the focused expression of a woman calculating what was possible. "May I?" she said, gesturing toward the pantry. "Help yourself." She found dried pinto beans, a half sack of cornmeal, a heel of salt pork, some dried chilies, and a jar of lard. She found onions hanging from a cord near the window and garlic braided beside them. She did not find much else. "Where's your flour?" she asked. "Barrel in the corner." He paused. "Might be weevils." "Might be," she agreed, and went and looked and sifted out what she needed without ceremony or complaint. She put Tomas to work filling the water bucket and set him to hauling from the pump outside. She set Marisol, who was quiet in the particular way of someone who had learned silence as a survival tool, to clearing the table, which the girl did systematically. Stacking Elias's old mail in a neat pile on the sideboard without being asked to keep it rather than discard it. Elias sat in the chair by the window and watched this happen in his kitchen and felt something he could not immediately name. It was not discomfort, exactly. It was more like the feeling of a room that has been shut up and aired out all at once. The beans would take too long for that night's supper, so Cora soaked them in a pot on the back of the stove for the following day. What she made instead was cornbread, real cornbread, not the dry, forgettable kind, mixed with the lard and a little sugar and a handful of the dried chilies, crumbled fine. She rendered the salt pork in the skillet until the fat ran gold and fragrant, then fried sliced onion in it until the kitchen smelled like something Elias had almost forgotten. She made a thin gravy from the drippings and a cup of water and a scrape of whatever flour was left on her hands. It was not a rich supper. But it was the first meal in that kitchen in 6 years that had been made with intention. They sat at the table, Elias at the head out of habit, Cora to his left, Tomas and Marisol across from each other. The boy ate with the desperate focus of the genuinely hungry, barely pausing between bites. Marisol ate slowly and carefully, cutting her cornbread into precise pieces. Cora watched her children eat and her own food went nearly cold before she picked up her fork. Elias noticed this too. He said nothing. He cut a piece of cornbread and ate it. Outside, the evening insects had begun their argument with the dark. A single mockingbird was running through its whole inventory somewhere in the live oak by the barn. "This is good," Elias said. 2 words, flat and plain. But the way he said them, without inflection, which for a man of his particular economy of expression meant something real, made Cora look up at him across the table. "Thank you," she said. Tomas asked if there was more. Cora started to say no. Elias said, "There's more," and cut the boy another piece himself. Marisol watched this from across the table and said nothing. But she watched. The first week was careful. They moved around each other with the choreography of strangers sharing a too small space, polite, alert, slightly formal. Cora cleaned the house from ceiling to floor in a systematic campaign that moved room by room and left the walls smelling of vinegar and lye soap and, eventually, open air. She scrubbed the grease from the kitchen window until the glass ran clean and the hill country came back into view, mesquite and cedar and the thin brown line of the creek a quarter mile off. Elias found himself pausing in the kitchen doorway more than he used to. He put Tomas to work with him on the fence line along the south pasture, which had been losing the argument against the terrain for 2 seasons. The boy was small but not useless. He learned to hold the wire taut without being told twice. He didn't chatter, which Elias appreciated, though once, on the second morning, he asked Elias how old his horse was. 14, Elias said. That's old for a horse. He doesn't know it. Tomas considered this. Then, my father had a horse. Elias kept working the wire. That so? Yes, sir. A pause. He's gone now. The horse and my father. Elias glanced down at the boy. The boy was looking at the fence post with absolute concentration. I know, Elias said. It was all he said. But his voice had changed pitch just slightly, dropped to the register of something genuine. Tomas nodded once, the way men do when they have been understood without having to explain further. Then they went back to work. Marisol remained the harder country. She was civil, she was helpful, she was utterly unreachable. She braided her hair with military precision each morning. She assisted her mother without being asked. She spoke to Elias in complete sentences when spoken to directly and offered nothing more. Her eyes, when they landed on him, carried a measurement in them, not hostile, but assessing. Waiting to see what kind of man he would prove to be. He thought of those eyes later that week when he drove into Hadley's Crossing for supplies and stopped in at Burl Emerson's hardware store. Burl was behind the counter and his wife, Loretta, was ostensibly there to help a customer but was really there to know things. Heard you took in some folks, Burl said, setting Elias's nails on the counter. Hired on a housekeeper, Elias said. He examined the nails. These the galvanized. Who is she? Loretta asked, abandoning any pretense of the customer beside her. Woman named Cora. Does good work. He picked up his nails and put down the coins. Mexican. Loretta said. Elias looked at her then. He let the silence run long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, she's a widow with 2 children, Loretta. Same as half the women in this county after the fever year. He picked up his package. Good day to you both. He was out the door before she could construct a response. What he did not know, what no one on the Alderman Ranch knew yet, was that 40 miles south and east, in a town called Seco Bend, a man named Darrow Vasquez was making inquiries. He was Cora's brother-in-law, her late husband's brother, and he was the reason Cora had run, and the reason Roy Delaney had placed that careful favor-calling phone call to Elias on a Thursday evening in August. Darrow Vasquez was not a violent man by nature. He was something more specifically dangerous than that. He was a man who believed he was owed something and who had the patience to wait for collection. He had a claim, dubious, constructed of paper and leverage, on the small parcel of land that Cora's husband had left her. Land she had already sold out of desperation before leaving, which meant the claim was worth nothing, legally. But legal worth and a man's belief in his entitlement have almost never been the same thing. He had her last direction. He was moving toward it the way a drought moves, slow, inexorable, and terrible in arrival. It was the 3rd Saturday after their arrival when Cora took Tomas into Hadley's Crossing for the week's provisions. Elias gave her the household money, exact change, counted out, placed on the kitchen table, and told her to get what was needed and charge the rest to his account at Picard's store. He did not go with them. He had a horse to shoe and a water trough that had developed a slow crack. What he did not anticipate was the afternoon visit he received while Cora was away. The buggy came up the road at a self-important pace. Elias straightened up from the trough and recognized the driver as Judge Clement Harrow, not a sitting judge any longer, but a man who had held the title long enough that the town still deferred to him as though he did. He was 65, thick-necked, well-dressed in the performative way of men who want you to know they are more prosperous than you. Beside him sat his wife, Adelaide, in a yellow dress that had not been designed for hill country dust but wore it anyway. Elias, said Harrow, pulling up. Clement. Elias set down his tool. He did not offer his hand or his porch. Harrow climbed down with the labored dignity of a heavy man who refuses to acknowledge that climbing down from things has gotten harder. Adelaide remained in the buggy, which told Elias this was not a social call that would go well. We've heard some things, Harrow said. You and everybody else in this county, Elias said. What is it you think you've heard? That you've taken in a Mexican woman and her children under your roof. I have a housekeeper and her family in the house, Elias said. Yes. There are those who feel, Harrow paused, selecting his words with the caution of a man who knows he's on uncertain footing but is too proud to retreat, that the arrangement is irregular. A widower, alone. A woman without a husband. It reflects on the community, Elias. On the character of the alderman name, which your father worked, my father, Elias said, quiet and level, was a man who paid fair wages and kept his word. I don't imagine he'd find anything irregular about what I'm doing. Harrow's color came up slightly. I'm speaking of appearances. I know what you're speaking of. Elias picked up his hammer from the fence post and held it loosely. Not threateningly, simply the way a man holds the tool he was using when he was interrupted. I'm telling you what I'm doing is running a household. Cora Vasquez works hard and earns her wages and her children are no trouble. Anyone who has a difficulty with my hiring arrangements is welcome to keep their difficulty to themselves. Adelaide, from the buggy, said. It's the girl we're most concerned with. Elias turned to her then, something that made Adelaide draw back just slightly from the steadiness of his attention. Marisol, she said, pressing on. A girl of that age in a house alone with her mother is here, Elias said. Her brother is here. I am here. He paused. I'm going to suggest, Adelaide, that whatever construction you're putting on this situation is one that says more about your thinking than it does about my house. There was silence. The horse in the buggy tossed its head against the flies. Meanwhile, in Hadley's Crossing, Cora was having her own version of this conversation, though she hadn't sought it. She was at Picard's store, reading the list Elias had left: flour, salt, baking powder, lard. Dried apricots which she had added herself because Tomas had an ongoing grief about there being no fruit, when Loretta Emerson appeared beside her with the gravitational certainty of a woman who considers herself the social regulator of any room she enters. You must be the new woman out at Alderman's, Loretta said. Cora did not turn immediately. She finished reading the line she was on. Then, I am. How are you finding it out there? Fine, Cora said. She moved along the shelf. Loretta moved with her. He's a solitary man, Elias Alderman. Always has been. Since his wife passed, that was 6 years ago now, he's just closed himself up out there. We've all worried. Cora selected the baking powder. He seems capable of managing. Oh, certainly. But, Loretta lowered her voice to the specific pitch of false intimacy, some folks are wondering about the nature of the arrangement. I'm sure you understand. A woman in your position, widowed, with children, it can be vulnerable. There are those who'd wonder what you're giving in exchange for. Cora set down the can she was holding. She turned to face Loretta directly, and there was something in her face that stopped Loretta mid-sentence, not anger, exactly. Something older and more final than anger. I clean his house, Cora said, very quietly. I cook his meals. I wash his linens and tend his kitchen garden and keep his pantry organized. These things have a value. He pays that value. That is the arrangement. She picked up the can again. What is exchanged is labor for wages. Same as any man working any ranch in this county. The fact that I am a woman does not make it something else. She moved to the counter to settle the account. Loretta did not follow. Tomas, who had been examining the jars of penny candy with the expression of someone doing complicated mathematics, glanced at his mother as she reached the counter. He had heard everything. He put down the candy and came to stand beside her, close enough that his shoulder touched her arm. She reached over and smoothed his hair without looking at him. The night Elias caught Marisol at the breadboard was the same night Darrow Vasquez's horse was found at the creek crossing. Elias didn't know that second part until morning. What he knew at 3:17 was that a frightened girl was kneading bread like her life depended on the activity, and when he asked her if she was going to tell him or wait for morning, she pressed her lips together and looked at the far wall and said nothing. He pulled out a chair and sat at the table. He did not tower over her. He sat down to her level, and in that small act of gravity, something in her posture shifted. Does your mother know you're down here? He asked. No, sir. You having a nightmare? She hesitated. Sort of. What kind of sort of? She turned back to the bread. Her hands worked the dough with slow, careful strokes now, the urgency had gone out of them, they were moving from muscle memory rather than fear. She was stalling, and he recognized it, and he let her. "I heard something," she finally said. "Outside." Elias went very still. "When?" he said. The same flat voice, but with a different quality in it now. Attentive in the way a man gets before he moves. "Maybe an hour ago. Maybe more." She glanced at him sidelong. "I thought it was a deer, first. But it wasn't right. It stopped too precise. Deer don't stop like that." Elias stood up from the table. He moved to the back window and stood to the side of it, not in front of it, and looked out into the dark yard. The moon was a thin rind. The live oak was a shapeless mass. The barn was a darker shape against a dark sky. Nothing moved. He went to the hook by the back door where his rifle lived and took it down. He checked it with practiced hands, the small sounds of a man who has handled a firearm in the dark many times and knows exactly what he's feeling for without needing to see it. "Stay here," he said to Marisol. "Keep that lamp low." "Mr. Alderman, stay here," he said again, gentle but final. He went out the back door without a lamp, letting his eyes adjust to the dark before he moved off the porch. The night air was warm and insect loud. He circled wide around the barn rather than going straight to it, moving through the side paddock in the grass to quiet his boots. At the corner of the barn he stopped and listened. A horse. Not one of his, he knew every sound his animals made. This one was restless in the way of a horse that's been ridden hard and left tied rather than stabled. The soft percussion of an unfamiliar animal somewhere along the fence line. He moved along the barn wall, rifle at a ready angle, and came around the north corner. The man was crouched by the water trough, the one Elias had been repairing just that afternoon, drinking from it with a cupped hand. He heard Elias at the last moment and came up fast, one hand going to his belt. "Don't," Elias said. The word had no heat in it. It didn't need to. The man stopped. His hand dropped. He straightened slowly. In the thin moonlight, Elias could make him out. He was 40 or so, lean, with the road-worn look of someone who'd been traveling hard and not sleeping much. His face carried a particular expression, not fear, exactly, but recalibration. He'd expected to be alone. "This is private land," Elias said. "I know it." The man's voice was steady. "I'm looking for a woman named Cora Vasquez. And her children." "You got a name?" "Darrow Vasquez." Elias kept the rifle at its angle. He could feel the weight of the thing in his arms and the weight of something larger in the air between them. "You're the brother-in-law." Something shifted in Darrow's expression, recalibration again. "Roy told you." "Roy told me enough." Darrow's jaw worked. "She has something that belongs to my family." "The land, she sold that land 8 months ago," Elias said. "Man named Castillo in Bexar County holds the deed." "I verified this." He had done no such thing that night, but Roy had told him, and Roy's information was generally solid. And the specificity of the statement had the desired effect. Darrow's posture changed, the way a hand unclenches when the thing it was gripping turns out to be nothing. "I want to see her," Darrow said. "No," Elias said. The word was a door shutting. She's under my protection," Elias said, and the simplicity of it, the total lack of ornamentation or qualification, seemed to confuse the man. "Come back to this property again without an invitation and I will have you taken up for trespassing. I have a good standing with the law in this county and you have," he paused, the look of a man who doesn't. He tilted his head toward the fence. "Your horse is along the north fence. I suggest you collect it." Darrow Vasquez stood in the moonlight and looked at the old man across the yard for a long, measuring moment. Then something left him, the way air leaves a bellows, and he turned and walked toward the fence without another word. Elias listened until the horse sounds moved away and then kept listening a while after that. Then he went back inside. Marisol was at the table where he'd left her. She hadn't lowered the lamp. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, the dough forgotten, looking at the door. When he came in, she let out one short, quiet breath, the kind that had been held long enough to hurt. He set the rifle back on its hook. He went to the stove and put the kettle on. He moved without hurry, filling the silence with the ordinary sounds of a house at night: water, metal, fire. "He's gone," Elias said. "For now," she said. It was the most she had ever offered him, and prompted, and what it offered was the truth of how long this had been going on, how far they had run, how much she understood about what following them. "For good," he said. He said it with a certainty that he was already planning to make real, starting first thing in the morning. He made the tea. He put 2 cups on the table. He sat down across from her and wrapped his hands around his cup and didn't speak again. And she sat across from him in the kitchen at 3:42 in the morning with the bread dough drying on the board and the lamp burning low, and outside, the mockingbird, same one, or one who had taken up its post, began an unexpected, insomniac song. He rode to Roy Delaney's first thing in the morning before the heat had built, while the sky was still the color of peach skin and the air held the brief forgiveness of a Texas dawn. Roy was already out on his porch with a cup of something. He watched Elias ride up with the expression of a man who has been expecting something for several days and is not surprised by its arrival. "He came last night," Elias said, not dismounting. Roy set down his cup. "Darrow. He was at my water trough. He'd been there a while before I found him." "What did you do?" "Sent him on his way." Elias's horse shifted beneath him. "What I need to know is whether his claim is as worthless as you told me." "The land claim is nothing," Roy said. "She sold legally, sale was recorded in Bexar County, I have a copy of the filing. Darrow Vasquez has no legal grounds." "He knows it." "Then why is he still following her?" Roy was quiet for a moment. He was a deliberate man, and deliberate men take their time when what they're saying matters. Because he believes that without a man standing behind her, she has no practical recourse. Legal rights and practical protection aren't always the same thing, Elias. You know that. Elias looked at the far line of the horizon where the sun was climbing. He knew it. He had known it his whole life, had watched it prove itself true in the case of women and men without money and anyone without the right name or standing. The law was a framework. What happened inside the framework depended entirely on who was holding it up. "I want to talk to your attorney friend in Segovia," Elias said. "Marchetti? About what, exactly?" Elias looked back at him. "I'm going to put Cora Vasquez on the deed to my property as a joint tenant." Roy's eyebrows moved. He was not a demonstrative man, which made the eyebrow movement significant. "That's a serious thing." "I'm a serious man. People will say things. People are already saying things." Elias picked up his reins. "I'd rather they say things about a legal document than about a widow alone on a ranch with no protection and a man tracking her down. Set up the meeting." Roy picked up his cup. He looked into it. Then, "All right." The meeting with Marchetti happened 4 days later in the attorney's office in Segovia, a room that smelled of old paper and tobacco and the particular mustiness of documents that carry weight. Marchetti was a compact Italian-American man who had practiced law in the Hill Country for 20 years and had seen most of what human greed and desperation could construct. Elias sat across from him. Cora sat beside Elias, straight-backed, hands in her lap, wearing her best dress which had been mended so carefully the repairs were nearly invisible. She had not spoken when he'd told her what he intended. She had stood very still in the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands and looked at him with those measuring eyes and said, "Why?" "Because it's practical," he said. "Because it gives you standing that can't be argued with and a home that can't be taken. Because your children need roots and I have more land than one old man can use. People will think, I know what people will think," he said. "They'll be wrong about some of it and not entirely wrong about the rest, and I find I'm past the age where I care which is which." She had turned back to the dishes then. He thought the conversation was over. Then, very quietly, without turning around, "My husband was a good man, Mr. Alderman." "I believe you," he said. "I am not looking to replace what I had." "I'm not offering that," he said. "I'm offering what I can give, which is land and a legal name attached to it and a house that has room in it." He paused. "And I'm not a bad man to work alongside, I'm told." She had made a sound that might, in different lighting, have been the beginning of something like a laugh. "By who?" "By Roy Delaney, who has known me 30 years and has a reason to say it." "Roy Delaney has a reason for most things he says," she replied. And that was how Elias Alderman found out that Cora Vasquez had, beneath the mended dress and the careful silence, an opinion about the world that she did not always keep to herself. Marchetti drew up the papers. He explained the legal framework, joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which meant that each party held an equal and undivided interest in the property, and upon the death of either, the interest passed automatically to the survivor rather than to heirs or creditors or anyone else who might be waiting with a claim. He made it very clear to Cora what she was signing and what it meant and asked her 3 separate times if she understood and if she was signing of her own free will. Each time she said yes in the same quiet, clear voice. Elias signed without fanfare. Cora signed below him in a hand that was precise and practiced, a hand that had spent time with books as well as bread dough, which told Elias something else about her that he filed away. Marchetti notarized the document and filed the copy, and that was that. The Alderman Ranch, which had been solely Elias Alderman's for 6 years and solely his father's before that, now had 2 names on it. The town's response was more complicated and more gradual than a single reaction. Judge Harrow made a remark at the feed store that 2 men heard and found worthy of repeating at the barber shop. And from the barber shop it traveled the way such things do, into kitchens and across back fences and through the particular social channels of a small town's internal weather system. But something interesting happened alongside the gossip. People saw the Alderman place when they drove past on the county road. They saw the kitchen garden, which had been an overgrown patch when Cora arrived and was now a productive and well-organized space of beans and peppers and tomatoes and herbs. They saw the mended fence line and the whitewashed barn front and the curtains, new ones, yellow, in the kitchen window. They saw Tomas helping Elias in the yard with the cheerful competence of a boy who has been given something purposeful to do. They saw Marisol, upright and serious and beautiful in the manner of young people who have survived difficult things, walking to the schoolhouse in Hadley's Crossing every morning with her books under her arm, because Elias had told Cora on the 2nd week that the girl was going to school and he would drive them to town to register her himself. Which he did, sitting in a chair outside the schoolmaster's office with his hat on his knee and his best boots on his feet. And gradually, because a community's opinion is as much about what it sees day after day as about what it says in any one moment, the nature of the conversation changed. Loretta Emerson was first to change the shape of it publicly, which surprised everyone including Loretta. She did it by stopping Cora at Picard's store 6 weeks after the deed had been filed and saying, with the particular effort of a woman who finds apology difficult, "I think I may have been hasty in my judgments. The curtains in your kitchen window are very nice." It was not much. But in the economy of Hadley's Crossing, it was something substantial. As for Darrow Vasquez, Marchetti sent a letter to the last address Roy had on file, a terse and legally precise document explaining the current standing of the property, the joint tenancy, and the specific legal consequences of any further harassment of persons residing therein. He also sent a copy to the sheriff of the county where Darrow was last known to operate, and to the Land Records Office in Bexar County, and to Roy Delaney's attorney in San Antonio. A man who had been following a widow with no legal standing and no money was one kind of problem. A man who would have to contend with a deed filing and a named attorney and a sheriff's correspondence was a different calculation entirely. Darrow Vasquez, who was many things but was ultimately a practical man, made the practical calculation and turned his attention elsewhere. He was never seen on the county road to the Alderman Ranch again. It was Marisol who told Elias what the bread had been about. She told him on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after the night at the kitchen table, when they happened to be the first 2 people awake and the kitchen held the specific perfect silence of a house still asleep. She was making the bread for Sunday, deliberately, this time, with her mother's recipe open on the counter, and Elias came in for his coffee and she said, without being asked and without preamble, "My grandmother used to say that if you couldn't sleep because you were frightened, you should make bread. Because the dough needs you to fight it, and fighting it makes your hands feel useful, and when your hands feel useful your mind remembers that you are not helpless." Elias poured his coffee. He stood at the counter and considered this. "That's smart," he said. She was smart, Marisol said. She pressed her palms into the dough and leaned forward. "I was scared that night. I heard the horse and I knew what it meant and I needed my hands to be useful." "They were," Elias said. "You were the one who heard him first." She looked up at him then, that long, measuring look that had been assessing him since the first day. Whatever conclusion she reached that morning, she kept it to herself. But she reached it. He could see the decision of it moving through her eyes like weather passing. She turned back to her bread. He took his coffee to the porch and watched the sun come up over the hill country, red and enormous and making everything it touched look briefly like hammered gold, and somewhere in the live oak the mockingbird had already started its work for the day, running through its catalogue of every sound it had ever heard and found worth keeping. There are places that seem past saving. Old houses where the dust has settled so deep it's become structural, where the emptiness has lasted so long it starts to feel like what the place was built for. Old men, too, can go that way. Can mistake their quietness for peace and their loneliness for self-sufficiency until the years have settled over them like dust and they forget that the house was once full of sound. But a house that's been aired out remembers what it was for. And people are not so different from houses in this way. The ones who have learned to need nothing, to ask for nothing, to give only what is extracted, they still carry the original architecture somewhere inside them. The load-bearing walls are still there, even when everything else has gone to neglect. What happened at the Alderman Ranch in that long autumn was not a rescue. Cora Vasquez was not saved, because she had never stopped saving herself, she had only needed ground solid enough to save herself on. Elias Alderman was not redeemed, because a man who has quietly done right his whole life does not require redemption. What happened was simpler and harder and more real than either of those things. Two people with broken pasts and sturdy characters found themselves on the same piece of land at the same time, and they decided, without sentimentality and without ceremony, to hold it together. And from that decision, made in the plain language of deeds and fence lines and Sunday bread and children sent to school, something grew. The way things grow in the hill country, not fast and not showy, but deep-rooted and drought-resistant and built for the long seasons ahead. That is the only kind of growing that lasts.